All right, I need to confess something, and I think a lot of you are going to relate. Lately, I've noticed that young men, like guys in their late teens, early 20s, sound kind of effeminate to me. Their intonation, their vowels, the way they end sentences. And I catch myself thinking, do guys always sound like that? Or is something happening to masculinity? And here's the thing, something is happening. It's a real, measurable linguistic phenomenon, but it has absolutely nothing to do with masculinity per se, or screens, or whatever the discourse wants you to believe. Not enough protein, raw milk. Raw milk. What you're hearing is one of the most robust findings in all of sociolinguistics. Women and girls are the engine of language change. Always have been. And those young men, they're not actually sounding like women. I mean, they kind of are to me, but they also are sounding like the future. They learn to talk from women who are already living in it. Let me explain. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I've got a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania. And on the channel, I discuss everything related to language, linguistics, language learning, and culture. If you're into those things, like and subscribe. Today, we're addressing why young men sound girly to us grizzled old graybeards. This is Old Man Jones. This is Language Jones. This video is sponsored by Lingoda, and truthfully, I'm really glad to be partnering with them again right now. If learning a language has been on your list forever, but life keeps getting in the way, Lingoda Flex was literally made for you. It's a live online language school with real certified teachers and small group classes of 5 people max, so you actually get personal feedback, not just a lecture. And because scheduling is 24/7, you book classes around your life, not the other way around. I've used them to polish my French and to prepare before a trip to Italy last year, and I cannot recommend them enough. I'm also an entrepreneur, educator, and dad with a highly variable and jam-packed schedule, and their flex plan allows me to squeeze in a lesson and keep making progress whenever I can. Literally 24/7 options. There's even a 7-day free trial where you can take up to 3 classes completely free. So there's zero reason not to just try it. You're going to have a blast. You might even see me there. And right now, their June sale is live through June 22nd. Use my code JonesJune at checkout, and you can get up to 35% off a Lingoda Flex plan. The link is in the description. Don't wait on this. The sale ends June 22nd. I used to play a game, I didn't come up with it, called Gay or European. I'm old enough that I remember the metrosexual panic. I'm old enough that I remember when the national discourse was about whether real men ate quiche. And I've had to update the game to Gay, European, or Gen Z. By the way, I have other games, like in Manhattan, in October, you get to play Is It a Costume? And Is He Rapping to Himself or Mentally Unwell? That's a fun one on the subway. But today is about Gay, European, or Gen Z. So here's the headline result, which has been replicated across dozens of languages and dialects. When a sound is changing, when a vowel is shifting, when new intonation patterns are spreading, when an old pronunciation is dying out, women are statistically ahead of men, usually by a generation, sometimes more. This was first really nailed down by William Labov, like basically everything else in sociolinguistics, in his work on places like Martha's Vineyard and Philadelphia. One is a lot nicer than the other, in the 60s and 70s, and it's now called one of Labov's principles of linguistic change. For changes from below, meaning changes happening below the level of conscious awareness, which is most of them, women lead. And it's not subtle. When you map out who pronounces a shifting vowel the new way versus the old way, you get this beautiful staircase. Oldest men at the back, then older women, then younger men, then youngest women out in front, pioneering the change. Which means if you're in your 30s or 40s listening to a 19-year-old guy, you're hearing speech patterns that were established when he was a toddler by his mother, by his older sisters, by his female daycare workers, by his female teachers. He didn't get girly. He got current. And the women around him, when he was learning to talk, were already living in the linguistic future that you haven't caught up to yet. Weird, right? Now, to appreciate why this finding is so wild, you'll have to understand the field that it disrupted. Dialectology, my very favorite. Old school dialectology, the discipline of mapping out regional speech, has historically relied on a category of speakers that linguists semi-jokingly called norms. That's an acronym: non-mobile, older, rural, male. The logic was reasonable on its face. If you want to find the most conservative, most locally distinctive forms of a dialect, the version least contaminated by outside influence, by media, by the prestige standard, you go find a 75-year-old farmer who's lived in the same village his whole life and whose parents and grandparents did too. He's your linguistic time capsule. And dialectologists did this everywhere. The big dialect atlases of England, of the American South, of rural France, they're built on interviews with norms. Old men in pubs, old men on porches, old men who have, with apologies, opinions about the weather. As an aside, there's a guy named Jules Giron who had literally the best dream job of all time. He bicycled from village to village in France, eating baguettes, presumably, and chatting with the locals to produce an enormous and enormously detailed atlas of French. But there's a problem with resting your entire analysis on norms. Several problems, actually. The obvious one is, by only listening to non-mobile, older rural men, you systematically miss everything that's changing. You get a beautiful photograph of the past, and you completely fail to see the future walking past your window, or the front porch, or whatever it is they're doing. The norm methodology is almost by design blind to the leading edge of change, which we now know is overwhelmingly female, often urban, often younger. Basically urban, female first, young. Buffy.
Take that back.
The deeper problem is when dialectologists did interview women, especially in the early to mid 20th century, women's speech got pathologized. It was called less authentic, more affected, influenced by fashion. Linguists would note that the women in a village pronounce things more like the city and treat that as contamination, as women failing to preserve the real dialect, rather than as the actual signal that women were leading change. We had the data the whole time. We just labeled it wrong because we decided in advance that the real language lived in old men's mouths. Pause. So why women? Why girls? This is where it gets really interesting because the why is not settled and there are several mechanisms working at once. Let me walk through one of the big ones. Mechanism 1, caretaker speech. In most societies across most of history, the people doing the bulk of talking to babies and small children have been women. Mothers, grandmothers, aunts, older sisters, female childcare workers, female early grades teachers. This is called child-directed speech, or sometimes still motherese, though linguists have mostly moved on from that term. We can talk about patriarchy and challenging gender roles and all of that, but the generalization holds for the overwhelming majority of human history and contemporary interactions. Not saying what should be, just what is. And child-directed speech isn't just baby talk. It's a specific register with exaggerated intonation, clearer vowels, and crucially, it is the primary linguistic input a child gets during the years their phonological system is locking in. If women doing the caretaking are themselves a half generation ahead on a sound change, that change gets transmitted directly to the next generation's foundational grammar, which then they move forward. The men in the household are all downstream of this. They're not the ones the toddler is spending 8 hours a day mimicking, usually. Mechanism 2 is the cool older girl effect. This is a huge and underrated one. Penelope Eckert's work in Detroit area high schools, her famous Jocks and Burnout study, showed in granular detail how teenage social hierarchies drive linguistic innovation. Slightly older girls specifically are extraordinarily influential. A 14-year-old girl is desperate to sound like the 16-year-old girls she admires. Those 16-year-olds are reaching toward the 18-year-olds. And the boys of all those ages are watching the girls, too, because the girls are social arbiters of who's cool and what's cool, among other reasons. It's the mean girl theory of linguistic change.
Stop trying to make fetch happen.
So a new vowel pronunciation, a new intonation pattern, uptalk, vocal fry, whatever the current moral panic is, starts with one cluster of high-status teenage girls and radiates outward and downward. Younger girls pick it up first. Younger boys pick it up shortly after because the girls that they want to impress are using it. By the time it reaches the boys, it's already been polished by a couple of cycles of female adolescent peer pressure. Mechanism 3, women navigate more linguistic markets. This is from sociolinguists like Leslie Milroy, working in Belfast and elsewhere, and building on foundational theory from Bourdieu, or as lots of affected academics call him strangely, Bourdieu. We need a Medea clip here.
Hallelujah! Hallelujah! Yes. Hallelujah!
Women historically have moved between more social networks than men, between home and work, between their own family and their in-laws' family, between neighborhoods, between formal and informal registers. Men in tight-knit communities often have denser but more closed networks. The same guys, the same job, at the same pub. Dense, closed networks preserve old forms. Looser, broader networks spread new ones. Women, by being the connective tissue between groups, end up being the vectors of change. Mechanism 4, women are more sensitive to prestige in both directions. Labov also documented that women lead in adopting prestige forms, the correct pronunciation, the standard variant, and they lead in adopting covert prestige forms, new, non-standard, locally cool variants. Men tend to be more linguistically conservative in both directions. The reasons here are debated and tangled up with gender expectations about how women are evaluated socially based on how they speak, which is a whole other video, which I should make, but the pattern is robust. So circle back to the thing that prompted this. You're in your 30s, your 40s, and a 22-year-old guy opens his mouth, and something about it just registers as feminine in your brain. It's not xenoestrogens in the soy, or birth control runoff in the water, or Jewish mind control, or whatever the manosphere is panicking about today. What's in the water that makes them so panicky and anxious? Leave me a comment. Here's what's actually happening. The vowel space he's using, his intonation contours, maybe some specific features like the high rising terminal, what gets called uptalk or creaky voice at the ends of phrases, were innovations led by women, roughly when he was being raised. He absorbed them from female caretakers and from the slightly older girls he wanted to impress in middle school. By the time he hit puberty, those features were already part of his native phonology. They're not feminine to him. They're just how people his age talk. And us old heads just keep getting closer to telling the young folk about how men were really men back in my day. What you're perceiving as effeminate is really just temporally female. It's speech that was, a generation ago, statistically more common in women's mouths than men's. The change has now diffused. Your ear hasn't caught up because your phonological system locked in when you were a kid, listening to your caretakers who were one full step back on the same staircase. And here's the kicker, the part that I find genuinely beautiful. In 20 years, those 22-year-old men will be in their 40s, and they will hear the new 22-year-old men and think, God, do guys really sound like that now? And the answer will be yes, because somewhere right now, a 9-year-old girl is doing something with her vowels that nobody's got a pejorative name for yet, and her little brother is listening. All right, so if you want some deep dives, look up William Labov on Philadelphia vowel shifts, among others, Penelope Eckert on jocks and burnouts, and Leslie Milroy on Belfast social networks. There's also great newer work on specific changes, the California vowel shift, the Canadian shift, the Northern Cities shift, and women are leading in all of them. I'll link to Labov's Principles of Linguistic Change below. Fair warning, it's technical, and there's also a lot to quibble with, but that's another video for another day, including one I'll link at the end. Language isn't decaying, it isn't getting softer or weaker or more screen-addled, it's doing what it's always done, changing generation by generation, mostly through the mouths of people we paid the least attention to for the longest time. Anyway, like, subscribe, tell me in the comments what speech features ages you the most. See you next week.